Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, hobbyist, and fan of various things. But I am talking today again about writing and publishing. This is part of a series in response to questions that I received about writing and specifically about how to get published. And I'm interviewing successful authors about their particular brand of publishing. And today's guest is K.A. Linde, Kyla. And she is extensively and very successfully published as a romance writer, as a fantasy author, and as what we might call a romantasy author, and currently has a big hit with the Oak and Holly cycle. So I want to talk to her about what she is working on, how she got where she is, the kind of strategies that she uses. I think you'll find it really interesting. So today we get to talk to Kyla, K.A. Linde, who is extensively published, both as a self-published novelist with a bunch of fantasy and romance series, and also as a tour author. And I see a book behind you,
Oh, yes. This
shelf.
is Red Tower, the Wren and the Holly Library. Yes.
So I just want to talk about what you have done, why you did it the way you did it, what tips and tricks you have learned along the way to share with other writers. But first, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yes, of course. I'm really glad to be here. It's exciting. I always love to talk about publishing, and there's not a ton of avenues out there for us to discuss it, especially considering most of our day is spent writing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So what year did you publish your first book?
My first book came out in 2012. It was self-published. It actually had been up on like a fiction press, which was sort of like the predecessor to Wattpad. Is
Uh-huh.
actually where Sarah J. Maas and I met. We were both writing on the site at the same time.
And
Um,
were you doing fan fiction or original?
no, original fiction, like Throne of Glass was Queen of Glass at the time, and that was on Fiction Press. And my book was called Avoiding Commitment, which was a contemporary romance, sort of with a dual timeline, um, angsty fest, cheating, good times, love triangles, all these things you're not supposed to be doing. I did them. People liked it, so I kept doing it.
So when you say people liked it, you mean they liked it when it was on Wattpad?
Yeah, Fiction Press. They read it there.
Okay.
And then I mean, I had a pretty good following there, because a lot of the authors at the time, we all connected, and then we would send our readers to each other the same way we do now, except we make money doing it. And then a at the time, a book blogger read it and reviewed it on her site, and she had like a massive following. In 2012, a blogger could read you, and your
Mm.
book could poof. And it did that. It went from like a couple hundred people reading it a week to like tens of thousands of people reading it a week, to the point where I got an email from another author who was like, "My friend read your book, and you're losing a lot of money. So you
Mm.
should publish this. And this is how you do it." And I looked her up, and it was like, I don't know who this person is, but she's at the New York Times, so she must be interesting. And it was Colleen Hoover.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she wasn't really obviously who she is now, with a
Sure.
movie and a nail polish line. Um, but yeah, she was like, do it. And so I was working on a presidential campaign actually, and I would work for like 100 hours a week at that, and then edit at night until like 1 or 2 in the morning, just because I was like, I have to get this out, I have to get this out. And then I released it, and it hit like the top 100 in the first 12 hours on
Top
Amazon.
100 on what?
Top 100 on Amazon. And yeah. And so it kind of blew up, and I said I was supposed to be going to get my PhD in
Mhm.
political science. And I was like, well, I have the second book already written, so I'll get off campaign and I'll edit it and publish it. And then it stayed in like the top 10 on Amazon for like 3 weeks, the second book. So I was just like, forget my PhD. I'm not gonna go do that. I'll just do this until I can't do it anymore. And 12 years later, I'm still here.
Still doing it. That's an
Yeah.
amazing story. I mean, I was going to say, what was it that drove you to? I mean, did you consider at that point? Did you when you When people said you're losing money on this, did you consider going to a traditional press and saying, I have these huge numbers in terms of, because you'd think that that would get them excited. Did you immediately decide you were going to self-pub?
I did. I never actually went the traditional route when I first tried because when I sort of looked into it, I had looked into it before because I was like, I would love to publish these, but I didn't know what I was doing. And then when you start looking into publishing it for romance, there's a lot of like rules in romance, like no love triangles, no cheating, no prologues, no back and forth, no past present. And there's like all these things that I did in my work that everyone said you're not supposed to do, which I still hear all the time. And
Mhm.
I still make a six-figure living doing the things that people say you can't do. Um,
It's interesting.
and so I was in my master's program at the time. So I was like, I don't have time to write a master's thesis and try to get my book published. And since I knew a bunch of people who had also self-published through, because I'd had that community of fiction press people, and they were all doing really well, I was like, well, I'll just do that. And then I wasn't really thinking I was going to make all that much money.
Right.
Um, and then I did. So Colleen Hoover was correct. She was correct. I was losing money. I just didn't know it.
That's
So
amazing. That's amazing. And you have a lot of books. So the first one you said came out
12. Yeah, July of
2012.
2012. The Ren and the Holly Library came out in June, and it was my 50th novel.
Good grief.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
and of course that's not something you could have done with a traditional press.
Correct. Yes. I did work with two traditional publishers. Well, I worked with Amazon when they first started doing Amazon publishing.
Hmm.
It was like the year they opened Montlake. They came to my agent after they read that series that had done well, and they were like, "What is Kyla doing? We'll take it." So I literally wrote a one-page proposal of a three-book series, and they bought it on proposal. Um, which was like that's not how traditional publishing normally works.
No.
So I feel like I got very lucky there. And then I wrote a vampire series in the middle of the vampire like purge when no one would buy vampires. And I sold it to Random House for a three-book deal. See, there's like a series here of me doing things that everyone says you can't do. But those books were bought by Red Tower again. Like I got the rights back and then they bought Ren and it did well and now they're buying them and republishing them.
Oh, I see. Right,
So
right,
there's some of
right.
that.
Yeah.
But I had a fantasy novel that I wrote around the same time, and it was called The Affiliate, and it was the first of a five-book YA fantasy. And when I got my agent, because like the week I published and my book did well, Colleen Hoover was like, "Do you want to talk to my agent?" And I was like, "Yes, I do. That would be great." So that's how I got my first agent, which is also not how you get an agent usually. Um, and so she was like, "Well, what else do you have? What do you want to do next?" She's the one who got me the Amazon deal. Oh, sorry. And I had a first in series fantasy novel that we edited and went out with, and I got 57 rejections on that.
Mm.
Um, and I spent 3 years crying. I
Mm.
was making so much money in contemporary, but I loved fantasy, but no one would buy my fantasy, so I was like, I'll just self-publish that. That series went on to make six figures. And um, now all I'm writing is fantasy. So
So I mean, this is fascinating, and your story illustrates a whole bunch of really interesting things. Not least of which, of course, is that the rules that people tell us are frequently just not right,
no,
and the rules that affect the way that traditional publishing functions and the things that they think are going to sell or not sell are often not right. So,
yeah,
so what is it? I mean, obviously, I was going to say, well, what is it that makes your book sell so well? And you can say, it's my genius.
no,
Um,
it's luck and timing.
luck and timing. Well,
I mean, you have to be a good
being modest.
storyteller, but
Hmm.
I also am firmly in the camp of luck and timing
Hmm.
because my vampire series sold well for a drought in vampires, but it didn't sell as well as the Ren and the Holly Library, which hit the very beginning of the romantasy trend. So,
Mm.
like with this book, I had written it in January of 2020. It obviously we couldn't go out to publishers when we were finally ready with it in April. No publishers were taking anything. So we spent like another year editing it. And
Mm.
then we went out to it and I got a series of rejections because they said either it had too much fantasy for a romance novel or it had too much romance for a fantasy novel. And I was like, do you see what A Court of Thorns and Roses is doing? What are you
Yeah.
talking about? Um, and then I actually had an editor come back and said, I really want to buy it, but marketing won't give me any money. And I respect and like your work too much to tell you to take this deal because I think you could make more money self-publishing. She's like, based on your platform. And she's like, if I was going to go out with again, I would change the title, which we did, and I would go out with a pen name so they don't know you're a romance author. Yep, that's what she said. We did change the title, but we went out with like, if you want to make her a debut, despite my numbers and like very strong social media following, she would do that. And then it actually ended up picked out of the slush pile by Red Tower by Liz Pelletier at Entangled, who said this is the book, and Red Tower wasn't even in existence yet. They'd only bought 3 books. I was like the 4th book. And I was actually really good friends with Rebecca Yaros, and I called her and was like, "Hey, you've worked with Entangled. Should I do this?" And she was like, "Actually, I have a dragon book. They're doing fantasy now." And so now we have Fourth Wing.
I thought it was a tour book.
No, no, Macmillan does the distributing
Oh, I
for, and
see.
the UK edition is with Tor.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
That's what I must have been
Yes.
looking
And
at.
they bought my backlist fantasy as well for the UK. So,
Wow. So, I mean, you say luck and timing,
yeah.
but it's also obviously, to a certain extent, regardless of the quality of the writing, it's also a following that you bring to the project,
Yes.
which you would think was a gimme as far as big publishers were concerned. I'm
It has
astonished.
not been.
It's
I
just
have gone
amazing.
out for contemporary romance when I have a huge following. I have made very good money my whole career. I have 50,000 people on my newsletter. Like, and I've gone out with books, 3 or 4 different contemporary romance books that I was like, I could definitely sell these very well, but I think they would do good in stores, and no one bought them. 0 people, all rejections. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't
I,
I don't
I
know what
don't
they
know.
think they know, but
Right.
they
I'm
they don't
afraid
know.
this is, yeah, I hear this all the time,
Yeah.
and people seem to present it sometimes as, oh, sour grapes. I wrote this great book and nobody wanted it. And then, and when people are telling that story, everybody's sort of quietly thinking, yeah, it's probably not very good. And then it does find a
Yeah.
market and it takes off and everybody says it's genius. And you're like, well, why were people not recognizing that initially? And I mean, do
Yeah.
you have an assessment? What is it that blinds publishers to good material?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, I do think they don't always know why things are selling. And
Hmm.
they're just a business model, and they have to hire people who can also think about the business and not just about the work.
Mm.
Because we can all say things that books that have done incredibly well that we don't think are maybe like either good store or like, I mean, usually they're good stories, but they're not well written, but
Mm.
they still get this like huge following, and publishers don't know which books are going to do that. And I've seen there's been a huge thing in indie that's really been the last year and a half where, and I really think like Bloom with Sourcebooks started it where they're buying print only deals. So they're
Mm.
waiting to see what the big contemporary romance books are, what is selling like hotcakes, and then they buy the print deal and put them on the USA Today and New York Times.
Mm. Mm.
So they're,
Mm.
instead of having to do the calculus of we don't know what's going to sell, we'll just buy whatever we think we like and then see if the masses like it. There's like less of a chance because you already know it's selling well with these big name indie authors because we
Mm.
don't have the print distribution. We can't get into stores, we can't get into markets like that. So it's like a going between for both of them. Um, the problem with that, of course, is it's much more difficult than for new authors to get discovered.
Right.
Because if they're buying 12 series from 12 indie romance authors who are already established. Where do they have room in their schedule to pick up people out of the slush pile?
Right.
And there are really good authors in the slush pile who are waiting to be discovered, and it's getting harder,
Mm,
on
mm.
both sides.
So let's talk about the calculus that you have to go through in terms of making a decision whether the next book is going to be a self-pub or
Yeah.
is going to be a traditional. What are the pros and cons that you process in making that decision?
Well, normally I would say going self-pub, you make more money. Um, it's not always the case for everybody, but considering I've been doing this for a long time, I've had my audience for a long time, I usually can say I'm going to make more money. I didn't with this book. It took off. It hit the New York Times for 2 weeks in a row. It was on USA Today for 8 weeks. Like it just the distribution was so much better.
Mm,
Um, but I would have always said before that if I thought the book would do well traditional, I would submit it, and then if they didn't, I would just self-publish it. There was a less stress of like, well, what
mm,
I'm going to do now. I follow some authors who I really love their work, and they have been trying to get traditionally published, and they've been traditionally published in the past, even like they've had 10 traditional published books, and now they're struggling to sell, and it's just like they don't have the option with the kinds of books they're writing all the time to just go, like if you have a middle grade and you wrote this from the heart and it sells to nowhere, it's so hard to self-publish those to get it out to a library audience.
right.
Like,
Right.
what do
Yeah.
you do with that? Like, I had the option of being like, well, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't sell, which it did, I've had multiple books not sell, then I will just self-publish it. Actually, with this book, when we were down, it would have been on it had been out for 9 months on submission, and I literally had a cover designer design it. I had formatted it myself. It had already been edited. I was like, I'm just gonna put it out there, and then 2 weeks later, someone bought it because I
Right.
was like, the energy I had was like, I'll just put it out next month. It'll be fine. In 2 months, I'll just put this out if because no one's gonna buy it. Um, so there is some. I have some uh like fallback, which a lot of people don't have, which I
Mm,
feel really very lucky for having an audience who supports me. And also, I do think part of it that a lot of other people don't have is I'm a very fast writer.
mm.
Um, I, I up until this year or last year when I had a baby, I was writing 500 or 600,000 words a year. So that's like,
Whoa, 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 hold it. Five,
yeah,
600,000 words a year?
yeah. hmm
Man,
It was
I'm,
like 5 contemporary romances and 1 fantasy every year, and that would come out to be about 500 or 600,000 words. And I was releasing 4 contemporaries and 1 fantasy every year.
wow, I feel like I'm doing well if I do half that.
No, but you are doing like I was. I'm telling you, like I am a very like I'm very slow in the beginning, but once I hit 20,000 words, I just wrote the second book in this series, and it took me like however long to get to 20,000 words, and then I wrote 130,000 words in 6 weeks.
Hmm.
So, and it's all good words. It's not like, I mean, I will have to edit them. The
Sure.
editing
Yeah.
is a lot. It's a lot more for traditional as well than it was for indie. But um, yeah, I'm a very fast writer. So if this thing doesn't sell or this thing doesn't, I have other things in the track. I do think that's one of the things that they really push in indie is
Mm,
like always have the next book ready.
mm,
Go for the next book, like have that one on a submission, but working on another series or you
yeah.
know, a lot of times, even in indie now, especially, like the first book doesn't take off, but the series can be really successful, um, which is I think, a lot harder. I mean, obviously, it works in traditional, but they're like a year apart.
Mm,
So, like, if
mm.
the first
Right.
book doesn't do well, you can lose your contract by the third book.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
doesn't happen in indie. I mean, people do pivot and they'll be like, maybe I don't want to write that other character or whatever, but yeah.
Mm, mm.
So, I don't know if
So,
I answered the pros or cons question, but I feel like there are
well,
so many pros
I,
and
th
cons.
I think, I'm still curious about when you say, from your experience, you make more money as an indie, as a self-pub.
Yeah.
So then, so why? Why would you then say, I want to publish with Red Tower or Tor or whoever?
Yes, that's a good question. I feel like some of it is the distribution that we can't get. And also, I think everyone sort of hopes that their book takes off.
Hmm.
You know, there's a difference between your book taking off in indie and your book taking off in trad, you know. We can't letter anymore unless we're in independent bookstores.
Hmm.
So self-publishing, I hit USA Today like 12 times with my indie books, and then they fired the USA Today person, and when they came back, they made it all the exact same as the New York Times. It's a curated list. It's like heavy on indie bookstores. So like even if my book is doing well, you can't tell. And those things actually help you, like especially with foreign rights and all of that sort of thing, like
Hmm.
getting deals. So I feel like it's been getting harder and harder to be as successful as I was in the beginning.
So
Um,
obviously you're making less money on a traditionally published book because the royalty is so much smaller. Do you
right.
think you're actually moving more copies?
Well, I am for this book. So I'm definitely making more money for this book, but this book took off. And there's no, again, there's no calculus to know whether or not you're going to be the book or you're going to be a book. You know,
Yeah.
there's a very wide gap in between them. And I got, again, sort of luck and timing I mean, there was strategy, right? Like I knew Romantasy was coming around, and I didn't sell. So in 2012, when 50 Shades was the hotness, and my contemporary romance books took off, we didn't try to sell them into stores to traditional publishers. And I always felt like if I had done that, I probably would have sold more copies in stores and like possibly hit the New York Times, all these things that you could do as an indie back then, but it was still hard.
Mm.
And now when I saw Romantasy coming around, I knew I was like, I can hit that wave. Like I hit, like the crest was up here and I hit it at here in 2012. And I was like, when the crest hits here, I want to be here. I want to be sitting and waiting. So there's some, having been in the industry long enough to recognize that. I feel like Jennifer Armentrout is really good at that. She sees the crest. She saw the crest in 2012 and she hit it at the exact right spot. She saw it coming for Romantasy. She hit it again. And I mean, some of that is just she writes incredible books. She has an incredible following. She's so smart and talented. Um, but I do think there's some strategy on how hoping they're hoping you hit right on
Mm.
that wave so you can ride it out.
And that kind of strategizing, you must be helped by the fact that you write fast, and
Right.
particularly when you're self-publishing, because chasing or going after those kind of trends in traditional is really tough because by the time your book
Possible.
comes out,
Yep.
it's 18 months after
Yep.
you turned it in, and the trend has changed.
Yep. It's true. I kind of saw it coming 2 years early. And I think that's what helped me. And I wasn't like chasing the trend in the way of like
Mm.
writing romantasy to hit the market, which is what you see a lot in indie and in that 2 year post wave. People were like, this is doing well. I'll write romantasy or whatever the hotness is at the moment. Like I was already writing romantasy. I already had that 3 book series out with Random House at the wrong time. I have a 10 book backlist, 5 book series. They were already out there. So I was already sort of known, but not, it wasn't my main focus. So like when I saw that the thing that I was already doing was doing well, I was like immediately like, get me traditional publishing for this. And my agent was like, okay, we'll do it. Let's try. So I
Well,
ended up hitting it at the right point, but it was because I was already invested. I didn't have to put any more time. That's all I read was fantasy. I'd been writing romance for a decade. It was like less about like writing to market and more hitting the market because I was already there.
right.
So,
Yeah. So,
which are hard things to differentiate.
yeah, that's true. What about strategizing as far as after the book is done, in terms of marketing, publicity, stuff like that? I don't know what, if anything, you do with your traditionally published books, but it must be, I assume,
Yes.
probably a lot less and different from what you do with your self-published stuff.
It was actually a lot more than I
Oh.
normally do with my self-published books, except that I didn't have to do ads because they were obviously running ads. But I had so much. So normally when I am self-publishing a book, I put it up on pre-order. 6 months to a year ahead of time. I'm always having it. I send out a newsletter every single week. I run ads. I do promotions through BookBub. I do promotions through Apple and the other retailers, and I um, work with other authors in my field. We usually promote each other. We do, I don't know if you know what like a Zoe Bub is, which is like everybody gets together and puts their book on free on a special day. We do sort of smaller ones of those, and we just do them with our newsletter subscribers. So all those sorts of like things that I normally do, which all felt normal. I send out promotion packages to book influencers and bloggers and that sort of thing. And I
Oh, really?
print arcs and I send arcs and I do audio and I do audio arcs. Um,
So some of this is costing a fairly serious amount of money up front, right?
yes, especially audio.
Mm,
Audio is definitely the biggest expense, but most people would say ads are their biggest expense. Like I know
mm.
people who spend 6 figures in ads on their release alone, just the release. I never did that.
That's wow.
It's a lot. And it's those people definitely like in KU chasing the top 100, chasing the top 10. They feel like if you spend just 50,000 more dollars, you'll hit number one. Yeah. I didn't chase that. I did spend, I think the most I ever spent was like $10,000 on a release week, like release week ads. And I did hit USA Today with that book, and it was my most successful series in contemporary romance, and it ended up being 17 books, and it had 7 books connected. So like I made my money back, like
Mm,
above and beyond. So it was like worth it, but
mm, mm,
um yeah, so with my traditional book, I still did all of my same newsletters. They had in-house publicity, but they also hired a publicity company that they work with as well, who gave me like a whole list of things to look at, like on my website and with promotion stuff. I probably did 20 of these sort of podcasts. They sent me on tour. So I was through Texas because I live in Texas. I was part of Fairy Loot, which is like a book box for fantasy, and I was one of
mm.
the romantasy books that was set up through Tor, and I had to sign 15,000 tip-ins in January.
What?
Yeah. And since then, I've had book boxes in Italy, Spain, Germany, and France, and maybe also Poland, and I've had to sign between 5 or 6,000 for like each of those since June, at least after release.
You at least get to go to those countries to do it?
Not no, I haven't. Well, I was supposed to go to the UK, and I was gonna have this thing with but my father-in-law got sick, and so
Okay.
we couldn't go. We needed to be here,
Yeah. Mm,
which was sad, but more important. So.
mm,
Yeah, I mean, other things that I did, I did a lot of writing for like posts. Like people would ask about the like if I did research or what kind, those sorts of posts about, and then promotion about books I read that I recommended, and I also wrote like a 2 chapter bonus, which I actually usually do for my indie books as well, but it's usually like a bonus epilogue. But I
mm.
wrote it from the male character's point of view of like the first 2 chapters as like bonus material. It was a lot. It was so much. I had to like stop writing for 2 or 3 weeks before release just because there's so much overwhelming stuff. But I actually hear that's not very common. Um, but their marketing team is really, really good. I think they see a lot of what the indies are doing, and they also have their own
Mm.
stuff, and they try to do both.
I mean, it sounds like a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been published by Tor and some of those other big houses, and I ain't getting that.
Yeah, they sent me to Decatur Book Festival
Oh yeah.
and New York Comic Con last month. So that
Nice.
was that was that happening too. So no,
So,
it's a lot. And
so
uncommon.
as you look at your entire career and all the things that you have done, and then when somebody comes to you and says, So I want to be a writer.
Yeah.
What should I do? What kind of advice do you give them? Not simply about writing, though that can be part of it too, but
Yeah.
particularly in terms of making the kind of decisions you have made in terms of how your books are going to get distributed and sold.
Yeah, no, I've actually since this book released, I've had like a wide swath of people suddenly come out of the woodworks to ask me that question. All over the place, people are like, "Hey, I have this book or I have this book idea." And so always first I'm like, "Wait, finish the book."
Mhm.
Because the book is the most important part. And it's the hardest part, especially if it's your first. Finishing is the hardest part because once you've done it, then you can do it again because you've done it. Not that it gets easier. I would actually say it kind of gets harder from there because then you have to like, especially if you're a perfectionist like me, you have to feel like you're getting better each book.
Mhm.
Um, which not everybody feels like if your book is good, then you just make the next one good and that's fine. Um, my brain doesn't work like that. It's a terrorist. So, yeah, I usually ask first like what their goal is because being published, as I have explained, is very different. There's so many different ways you can be published, and the way I was published and the way I have been traditionally published is very different than so many other people. If people even think what traditional publishing or independent publishing looks like.
Mhm.
So, usually if they're like, "Oh, I want to be traditionally published, I have a quarry," I'm like, "I'm going to send you to other people who know more about quarrying." I was like, "Here's my expertise on like you need an agent because an agent is the person fighting for you and not just to make the deal or to change the contract." I was like, "But I have found that you and the agent are the only person who really care about the book.
Mhm.
Like, even if the publisher loves and the editor loves the book, they don't love it as much as they want to sell it.
Mhm.
And you love it
Mhm.
more
Mhm.
than you want to sell it."
Yeah.
So the agent is always there to be the bad guy. I always say like, "Oh, I have to talk to my husband," which is code for I don't want to do this thing. I have to talk to my agent is the same thing.
Right.
Um, they're so
Yeah.
important. They're such an important relationship.
And
Uh,
is your agent involved in your self-pub stuff at all or not?
she is, but she
In what
is.
way?
She um is an incredible agent. She started out mostly working with independent authors. So she sort of has a side where she will help people who need help self-publishing, which I don't. But she has deals with Ingram, so she can get so if she puts everybody under her own name, she can get like cheaper printing deals because it's such a large quantity of books that everyone is doing all together. She also gets me deals for my independent books, like I audio deals, obviously foreign deals, but also comics and like oh, what's really big is those like online game things that people use, or they're sort of like serials of your book, and they'll like cut it up into pieces. Those things people read on, which I don't understand. You're just paying probably more money. So I'm on like Kiss and Dream, and she negotiates all of those contracts so that they're more favorable to me
So
for
she's
all of
getting
my
a commission on your self-pub.
right. But
Ah.
not on the like where I get my most of my money, which is usually like ebook and print.
Mm.
And I've actually do all of my own audio for the last 4 or 5 years, so she doesn't get anything on that either anymore. But yeah,
When you
she
say you
helps
do
me with
your own
voices, which
audio,
what?
so when you say you do your own audio, you mean you arrange the deal or you're recording the books yourself?
No, I'm not recording them. Oh my God, no, that would be terrible. No, I work with narrators.
Mm.
I had a very when I first started, I had a very close relationship with Erin Mallon, who is like an incredible audio narrator, and she was like, "I can do it, and I can get you a male narrator as well, and we'll use my production company." And so I would pay them per finished hour, which ends up being like 35 to $4,500 a book.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
super pricey. So
That's amazing. I mean, this is really interesting to me because it's so different
yeah.
from everything that I have done, but it's obviously working for you. It sounds great. Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I do think some of it, if you're not going the traditional route with quarrying, I generally think there's so much information online to be self-published, and so much of it has become gobbledygook. It's all
mm,
just like, here's my thing, and you need this, and if you don't do that or take this course, then you're never gonna sell. If you're not releasing 12
mm,
books a year, then you're gonna be terrible. Like, those things aren't true.
yeah.
Breathe. So I usually send people to like Wide for the Win, which is a group. Sometimes I send people to 20 books for 50K. That group can be really overwhelming for newbies. But I do think if you read their tree, there's like a tree in there of thought or whatever. If you actually read that, it's all very good information. If you just follow the group, I think you get overwhelmed really fast.
Mm,
But there's
mm,
lots of groups sort of out there like that have a lot of information. I send a lot of newbies to Alessandra Torre has an Alessandra's Inkers, and she does Inkers Con each year, which is really good for new authors. It's sort of one of those that sort of replaced like RT and RWA, which have sort of gone away, which were
mm,
good for new people, which is where I used to send people. Her group's really good for beginners. She has a newsletter that sends beginner information. And even though I know most of it, I still read it because like getting it back in your head is sometimes helpful and calming compared to the like crush of information. Um, but yeah, I mean, I also think it's it's hard to decide, especially because when I talk to a lot of new authors, they they struggle with like knowing the conflict of their book.
mm,
If you know what I mean, like they'll tell me what the book is about, and I'm like, but what is the conflict? And it ends up being like they just start explaining the book again. So there's some of that, like, honestly, you can go back to basics. You can go to Save the Cat,
mm,
which you love at the end of the day, I know we were talking about publishing, but craft is number one
mm,
for me. No, I can talk about publishing forever. Like for me, I feel like being figuring out all the craft tips and tricks is really uh what keeps the books
mm.
interesting for me and good long term. So
But you must also be incredibly driven and
yeah.
motivated to produce as much as you do and to put this amount of energy into both the craft and the sort of positioning and marketing stuff that you're doing.
Yes, thank you. That's so nice of you to say. If you've ever done your strengths test, it's like a big thing in romance right now. Everyone's doing their strengths test. I'm a number one achiever. I'm achiever, learner, input, something like that. And so it's always like I'm not competing with anyone else. It never feels like that to me, but I'm always competing with myself. So I think
Mm,
that's the like always learning the new things is what keeps me going, keeping me fresh.
mm,
Um and I find new craft things at every like convention I go to. There's something new someone is doing. There's a new productivity trick that can help me feel less stressed because I try to despite writing so much more, I tried to work less. That had been my big thing. Write more, work less.
mm.
And that worked for years. I was only writing from 10 to 2 Monday through Friday, and that was it. That's all I would work. And I was producing 100 to 200,000 words more by writing less, you know.
So, I mean, obviously you've built a following in romance and fantasy or romantasy. What happens if you think, oh, I want to write a thriller?
I probably won't want to write thrillers because I don't read them. But yeah, I mean, I could do that. One of the things I think that's really helpful, especially in self-publishing, I don't know as much in traditional publishing, but because I haven't done it as long. I mean, I have done it as long, but I didn't do it as consistently,
Mm,
is really staying in your lane is like it's such a hard thing to do, is like finding what you like to write and what the audience likes to read, and then giving them exactly that
mm,
is so hard because, like, I wanted to be writing more fantasy, but I knew my readers were all in contemporary romance. And
mm,
so I focused on contemporary romance because I used to say to Diana, actually, that romance was my day job
mm,
because I like in this on the side I would be writing fantasy, But romance was what I was writing all the time. And so I think to establish a new genre, you have to be well established in one already.
Mm.
So, like, if I'm well established in contemporary, I have 30 books in that. And I'd had 15 or 10 that were already pretty successful. People knew who I was when I first started writing fantasy. So people weren't like, what is she doing? This is weird. The covers were completely different. The stories were completely different. But the people who read both were like, oh, it gives me the same feeling. It's just set in a different world.
Oh, that's interesting. So you got
Because
a
it's
lot
like
of
what,
crossover.
yeah, it's like
Mm.
what you bring to the table is always going to be your voice.
Right.
And so that was what, so like if I wanted to after I couldn't do it right now because right now I'm in the middle of establishing myself as a fantasy author. Even though I've had 10 books before, 13 books before this is the one that took off. So now I need 5+ books to establish in that before I could go somewhere else.
It's
I think you
interesting.
also have to think about the genre expectations. So, like in fantasy, you can release one book a year. I mean, readers will still complain, but they understand. One book a year is normal. In romance, if you're releasing I would say less than 3 books a year in the same series, you're slow.
Wow.
Readers get upset. They want them every 3 months. I'm not kidding. And that's like reader expectation. So
Yep.
like if you're trying to get into a different genre than romance but still write in romance, it's hard because the
Hmm.
reader expectation is off. Um
Very interesting. And
yeah.
of course, a lot of this stuff has changed in that not that long ago, most people were buying their books in physical stores.
Yeah.
And so the different sections were
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
opposite parts of the building. So if you had a book in over here and a book over here, there wasn't as much traffic.
Correct. Actually, it's funny because we were talking about Diana. Diana Peterfron and I are very close friends, and I actually read her Secret Society Girl series when I was in college, and I was obsessed with them. And then when I found out she was self-publishing under a pen name, I only found out about it because the person who did my cover did her cover and she commented and I was like, "What? Explain this. How do you know Diana Peterfrein?" And that's how we became friends. I read her book and I told everybody else to read it and then she got a ton of sales and was like, "How is this happening?" And we became friends that way. But I didn't know she had a ton of YA books
Mm.
because I didn't read in YA. And so she was like, "Actually, no, I've been here. What do you mean you can't find any of my other books? I have like 3 or 4 other." And I was like, oh, I will go buy all of those. Thank you. But in a physical store, I was looking in the fiction section.
Right.
So
Yeah. So now
it's
that
nice.
people are buying more online, it's easier to find things by the same author and so on.
Easier to binge like
Yeah.
Netflix.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else do you think has changed most drastically as far as your career is concerned? What factors have shifted in the last 12 years or so?
Well, ooh, that's a hard one. So much has changed. Kindle Unlimited is probably one of the biggest. I was not ever really a KU author myself. I stayed wide through pretty much all of it and have had a very successful career, but I know it has changed the landscape for readers and authors. So many people are able to find people because they don't have the as high a cost to look at them. And it's made authors careers because more people will give them a chance without having to pay any money as they see it.
Mhm.
Um, I do think right now the print only deals is like a big thing that's shifting the market. The Gen Z crowd likes paperbacks and they
Mhm.
like paperbacks without people on them.
Huh.
Uh,
I know that.
it- yeah, they don't want to see the like sexy romance covers
Mhm.
that people like in their 30s and 40s and 50s and up have always been reading in romance. They want the sexy covers and then the Gen Z younger crowd is like, I want to read romance, but I don't want my friends to see me with that kind of cover.
Mhm.
So there's been a huge shift to the cartoon covers, which is attracting the younger audience. And then the print only deals to reach those people who read print and they don't read as much ebook. So
Mhm. So you have to stay really sort of tapped in to
Yeah,
just sort of be on top of all this stuff.
it's exhausting. Yeah. It never stops either. There was a big conference called Romance Author Mastermind that Sky Warren puts on. I couldn't go this year because I was at New York Comic Con, which, Comic Con I love. Um, but they have a virtual option, and that's happening this weekend. And I just have been like having it on, listening to people who are like the pillars of the romance community, talking about their successes, giving numbers, explaining what they think is working for them. And even if I'm like, I can't actually use any of that information, a lot of it is just like keeping it in the background. Like maybe I can do what they're doing, but different.
Mhm.
I just had a friend who was explaining like how they were a project manager for corporate world and how they use that to project manage their time as an author, and how she's been doing consultations to help people realize like we don't actually have 8-hour days, and like how long tasks actually take. And it just was like, oh, well, that's why I haven't been able to do my newsletter on a day that I'm writing, those sorts of things. And it's like connecting dots. And there's always, I feel like, more stuff to learn. And that's got
Mhm.
to be so intimidating for people who are just coming in, because there's so much to learn on both sides. And I feel really lucky that I have had friends who have been in the traditional space who have like walked me through things when I'm like, I don't know what this figure means. What is this contract term? Like my agent goes through it, but it's like having someone who will give me practical advice, or like publishing horror stories about how this would screwed over their friend, is
Mhm.
helpful. Um,
Yeah, that sense of community, I think, is really crucial. A lot of people
yeah,
think of writing as being a very solitary profession, which in some ways it is, but
yeah,
especially if you're going the kind of marketing routes and things that you're talking about, you need to know what's going on. You need some sort of support network.
yeah. Yeah, the
Mm.
community is the best part. It's the best part.
Anything else that you would like to add? I've already kept you longer than I said I would. So,
That's okay. Um, I don't know. I mean, always go back to write the book. And also the advice I've been giving everybody this since I released my last book is the talent and taste dilemma. It's that a lot of people don't end up finishing the book because they don't feel like their talent is as good as the things that they're reading, which is
mm,
just that your taste is so good that your talent hasn't reached it yet, but it's cyclical. Like your
mm,
talent will reach that and then your taste will get better. And it's a never ending thing that we're all going through, trying to get better, trying to be like our idols and always falling short. And then when we finally feel like we're there, then it's like, what's the next thing? What's the next? How am I going to make this better? It's like, especially for people like me, I have anxiety. Like it never goes away, that like constant thread of like, how do I reach these things? Like you'll read something, like I just read Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson, and I was just like, how does she do this? It's so good. You read it and you're like blown away. How do you do this? And meanwhile, I have like a very successful book, and I'm like, oh, I have some imposter syndrome. I'm not as good as her.
yeah,
So it's just there forever.
yeah. And
Just gotta
success
work
is
through
always a
it.
moving target, right?
It's a moving target. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm,
But
mm.
it's worth it, you know, to see your
Excellent.
stories out there.
Yeah. All right, Kyla, thank you so much. This has been terrific. I will make sure that all your books, your website, and everything goes up with the description of this video so that people can, if they don't already know who you are, they can find your stuff.
Excellent. It's so good talking to you.
Yeah, you. Thanks so much. So that's it. Thanks again to Kyla, to K.A. Linde for all that insight and thoughtfulness and somewhat daunting amounts of information, but I hope you find it really interesting and helpful because I think this stuff is gold. So, as ever, please like, comment, subscribe. Feel free to raise questions or suggestions as to other authors I might talk to at some point, particularly if they have a series that you're interested in, and I'll see if I can make it happen. Thank you to my patrons. I'm including the link to my Patreon page in the description. These people basically make this channel happen. So, special thanks to them. Check out my books, check out my merchandise, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you.